Thanks so much, Luke, for joining us on this first episode of the new series of 90s and Noughties. It's great to talk to you. I've been following you on social media for quite a time, and I think the reason you found the podcast, you were telling me beforehand, was obviously your love of the Renford Rejects, which, for those who don't know, is this weird late 90s Nickelodeon thing, which was the first UK production for that channel. What are your memories of that show, Luke?
For me, Renford Rejects is almost like a time capsule, because as a kid, I was a football fanatic and I would play every single day with my best friends. A lot of them I've lost touch with, sadly, over the years. And for me, Renford Rejects just encapsulates that childhood love for a sport and for your friends. You might not be particularly good, but you love it. And as long as there's that passion there, you can make great memories.
It's one of those shows where it literally had everything in it. I mean, there was the football element, which I really enjoyed, but there was obviously the celebrity cameos. The humor was on point. They had kind of these side stories that were about human discovery. And so, yeah, that is one great show. But the thing is that football in itself, to go on to the football thing for a moment, was huge at that moment in time. When it aired, I think the World Cup was about in France. I remember seeing an advertisement on Nickelodeon back in the day. It was this advertisement about football around the time of the World Cup. And they're talking about what you're talking about there, playing outside with your friends, scoring goals on a PlayStation football game or something. Like, it was just the era for that sport in general in the UK.
I can remember it was my first World Cup. I was a little too young for 94. And obviously, England didn't qualify. So 98 was my first World Cup. I remember doing a World Cup 98 assembly at school, where we all had to pick a different nation and they're colouring names on the backs of paper football shirts and sing Three Lions to the rest of the school. I remember it incredibly well. And I think it was football hit fever pitch. It was released at the perfect time. Build up to the World Cup with kids everywhere. Just couldn't get enough of the sport.
No, absolutely huge. And Three Lions had a different meaning then, that particular song. It wasn't quite so patriotic as it is now.
No, it was, even though I remember singing it with all my heart, not understanding the 30 years of her. I'd only been alive, 12 years at that point, but I remember 96 so thoroughly at that point, and you just that magic every time. You thought maybe, just maybe, this is going to be our year. And I still get it to this day. But maybe, just maybe. And it was a golden generation of players. It was fantastic. Summer. I remember that summer so well. It's like ingrained in my mind, and Rejects is part of that.
What team were you supporting at that moment in time?
Oh, well, this is where I'm a bit odd. I grew up a Manchester United fan for my sins, but that was because Ryan Giggs was my hero. Again, for my sins, I don't really know what to say about Ryan at the moment, but I'm actually from Sheffield. So, but my family are not into football at all. I'm the only person in my family who likes football. So I just followed my hero, and that was that. So Manchester United, a bit of a glory fan, if I've got to admit. But as Beckham fan, Beckham going into the World Cup, incredibly exciting times and a great year for Manchester United.
Oh, a superb year for Manchester United, because that was the treble.
I think it was 99, the treble. So, yeah, it might have been the season before. But I remember, I was a hardcore Manchester United fan back then. Absolutely hardcore. And these are my idols. It's hard to put in perspective how much you put that love into sports personalities as a kid.
Oh, yeah.
Like, meeting those would have meant the absolute world to me back then. I think that's why I love the Rejects, because when you're watching that near those guest stars, you think, those have got to meet these legends. Had you done anything to meet these legends? So yeah, I'd love to know more about that from their perspective.
I mean, you say you're from Sheffield and you were a Manchester United fan. You were closer than me. I was a Liverpool fan and I lived in Chichester in West Sussex. Michael Owen, just,
Well, talking about
again,
the France '98 World Cup, do you know that was how long ago was France '98 now? But yeah, I think his daughter's just gone into Love Island, and she's a year older than he would have been when he scored that wonder goal against Argentina. And that
oh,
made me feel so old. It made me feel absolutely ancient. But yeah, Michael Owen, even as a Man United fan, I loved Michael Owen. I think not growing up with a family who was into sport and it's ingrained, I could just appreciate the sport in general. So I love players from all over the league, which puts me as a very bizarre football fan to many people. But I got to enjoy the entire league for what it was.
I think the unfortunate thing about that era is that there were big clubs in Europe who would buy up these stars and then they'd just sit on the bench. It seemed. I'm looking at you, Barcelona, Real Madrid, those clubs. Like I remember when David Beckham was actually sold, and it seemed like it was an extortionate amount of money. And I think he was one of the few that I observed that was actually getting playing time. A few others, like Michael Owen, ended up going abroad, and it seemed just sitting on the bench. But that probably had something to do with injury.
See, I'm not quite. My knowledge on Michael Owen's Madrid career is not perfect, but I know I was surprised when I did look up his stats not that long back. They didn't get as much game time, but they had such a front view back at Real Madrid in those days. But if his record, a lot of people think he was a failure, but if you look at his goal scoring record, he's actually pretty decent at Madrid. But I did find out recently when looking into it that McManaman was an absolute hero in Madrid. They loved him. And the only kind he lost his place because he signed Figo from Barca. But yeah, I was an actual, again, Man United fan. I love McManaman. I asked my mum because I collected football shirts of all clubs, still got half of them to this day, and I had a Liverpool home shirt, and my mum wouldn't let me have McManaman on the back because it cost too much. So she goes, like, you can have Phil Babb instead. I'm like, no, I'm all right. Thanks, mum.
I think these days they'd be looking at those stats, wouldn't they, of shirt sales and going, Steve, you're not very popular. You're not, you're not selling many shirts.
Oh, man. I remember this in it was the foreign imports, wasn't it? Again, we'll probably go around, like Bruno Di Gradi. He was the Italian the Italian import. Italian football was massive. It was arguably the best league in the world at the time. And those foreign imports into English football just changed the entire game. Again, I couldn't go through a podcast being from Sheffield without me mentioning Benito Carboni. He was my idol as a kid. Absolutely loved Benito Carboni, Sheffield Wednesday midfielder, and he, very much Bruno Di Gradi, flair, intelligence, absolute fantastic player. And I think he was sitting on the bench much at Inter, wasn't playing much until he came to England.
You see, I always thought of Bruno as more of a Paolo Di Canio type.
Well, we love Paolo here at Wednesday as well. Wednesday loved Paolo Di Canio. The two Italians, it completely changed how Wednesday played. And they're still iconic to this day, that Wednesday fans absolutely love them to this day. I still remember them signing, and I remember the awful press conference when they got them to pose with a pizza. Quite racist if you think about it. I'm very stereotypical. Get them to pose with a pizza. And it was like a Tesco frozen pizza. So imagine coming all the way from Italy, the insult that you've got to pose with this Tesco iced frozen pizza. I can't tell, they were probably very happy at that all. But they were amazing on the pitch and absolute legends here in Sheffield.
Yes, I think there are some questionable things, and there was a bit of a synergy between pizza and football at that moment in time. Do you remember that advert that was out with, was it Stuart Pearce, Gareth Southgate, and yes. Who was the third one?
It was Chris Waddle, wasn't it, I think?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that all too well because it broke my heart. It was too soon. After those penalty misses to make a spoof of it on telly. I remember those pizza adverts very well. You don't seem to get as many sportsmen in television adverts these days you did back in the 90s. Like the Nike adverts were insane back in the 90s. And the one was it Junkie XL? The Elvis collaboration.
Yeah.
I remember the music video to that like it was yesterday.
That was brilliant. I really liked that, to use this word again, synergy between the old and the new. To go back to the Gareth Southgate thing, the fact that he's now become England manager and he's overcome all those obstacles. And the thing is, you said it yourself earlier, football was really big, not just big business like it is today. Like everybody was really passionate about it. So when someone misses, I mean, we saw it very recently with the final penalty shootout in the last year or so. When something like that happens, a lot of abuse goes towards the person who missed, and the fact that the media then went along with it, and even Gareth himself having to put himself through that to keep kind of reliving that. And then Gareth becomes the first England manager to get us to a final in decades.
It's crazy, isn't it? I think that must have been, I can imagine the elation and him feeling like I've redeemed myself. But thinking about that and the hatred again, I cannot ever remember being a kid, being angry at football, being angry at Southgate for missing that penalty. I was heartbroken. I was gutted. I was never angry at him. It's the sport's changed in some ways. I think Twitter doesn't help, maybe if it had been around back then. And I felt so bad for those young lads who missed against Italy. But they're going to bounce back stronger. Fingers crossed for the World Cup this winter. Never know. As soon as that Three Lions starts playing, we all get our hopes up, don't we? Just that little bit.
Definitely. And I'm sat here wondering, when's this Renford Rejects reboot coming? I mean, when is that going to rear its head? Because surely now is the perfect time to do it. And as we're recording this, Paramount Plus is about to launch in the UK, and I don't know how much you know about the streaming world, but in Europe they're required to make so much content for streaming and offer EU based content or European based content. It's about 30%. So actually, if you're listening, Paramount, who own Nickelodeon, who own Renford Rejects, if you please just give us even just a one-off special, you will be going towards that quota, and the government won't come down hard on you. You can be saved by the rejects.
It'd be a perfect time, like you said. The World Cup just around the corner, and I think a lot of people our age, older, who have children, watched it as a kid, would love to share that with their children. You've seen a lot of that. I know, a bit of a difference between the Star Wars franchise and the Renford Rejects franchise, but you see sharing things with your children. It seems nostalgia is bigger than it ever has been. It's all I write about and the name of this podcast. But I can't. It'd be a great opportunity if the actors are available, if they want to do it, even just some shorts on YouTube. I really enjoyed the ones that Matthew Leach did, in lockdown, and I really enjoyed listening to their podcast. And it seems like they're up for it. I'd love to see it again, because I still have such great memories. I've rewatched it in lockdown and thoroughly enjoyed it again. So I think it still stands the test of time, and hopefully it will be on Paramount Plus, and hopefully reach a whole new generation of football fans.
The fact that it hasn't really been available anywhere, and when it has been available, it's been on at like 2:00 in the morning, is crazy. The music rights might mess it up a little bit because of the tracks, but as far as I know, from memory, they never used anything like the Beatles or the Rolling Stones or anything like that. I always thought that the fact that the soundtrack, people talk about it being so like it's that era, but I found it quite limited, and I think that's almost its appeal. Like there was a very select number of tracks.
I think it was about 5 songs, weren't they? Rob Dugan's Club to Death, Republica, Chumbawamba. I'm missing some really key ones here. You might have to help me, but Australia, obviously Manic Street Preachers. But yeah, there was maybe only 5 or 6, but they use only clips out of them and snippets, which I think really well. But yeah, like you said, I've never thought about the soundtrack rights, because that plays a big part for me in Renford Rejects. And as I said, making it a time capsule of that time, that era, that music is so key. So I hope it's not to do with music, right? You've seen it an awful lot now in video games getting re-released, and you'd like to think that now anyone who's making sure they sign like lifetime agreements, so this doesn't happen in future. But yeah, I think without that music, it would take a massive dent, especially for older fans like me who, I can't listen to Manic Street Preachers Australia without thinking of Rejects. It's synonymous for me. It takes me straight back. As again, I was really young, so any Manics fans who have been into them for much longer, I apologise. But yeah, I wonder if it's something to do with that. I'd like to think it's got the fan base still there. The podcast that was run by the Rejects guys, if they're listening, hurry up and come back, guys. I thoroughly enjoyed it. But yeah, hopefully they can do something maybe to give Nickelodeon a bit of a kick to get the show back on the air somehow.
Hopefully, at some point in the future, it needs to come back in some kind of reinvention, even if it's just... Are you familiar with Girl Meets World?
Yes, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I'll admit my daughter is not old enough to watch it, but I watched it just because I loved the show as a kid, and I wanted to see those characters again. I think what is it called? The legacy sequels, they're calling them, and there's loads out there, and there's definitely a market for it. Well,
we'll just have to wait and see on that, because it's one of my favourite series. I'm sure it's one of yours as well. It's just so peak that era and just funny as well. And I've been very fortunate to speak to a few members of the cast. Those episodes are still available. I'm always looking to talk to more people. Who haven't we heard from in a while?
I don't think Ben, the actor who played Ben, and no one's heard of Bruno de Grade, or Adam Dean, who played Ronnie.
Well, Adam's a whole different ball game.
Could it be a stage name? I don't know. No one can find him. I have tried, and people much more dedicated and talented than me have tried too. Yeah, I think Bruno would be the big one to get on. But also, I'd like to hear from the directors and the writers. But I've tried looking for them, and they've got next to no Twitter presence or anything like that. But I'd love to get Ben. I've loved your interviews with them, with the cast. I'd absolutely love to have a chat with them one day, and just to chat with you, because I bet there's loads of stuff. There's loads of questions I'd like to ask them. Do they still have their shirts? Who was the best player? And because it ended quite abruptly, if I remember correctly, as well. It didn't really get a proper send off.
No, I'm guessing they thought it was going to continue and then it just cancelled. But to be honest, they were maybe a little bit too old by the time it finished.
Bruno looked about 30 in the last series to work out still in high school. But yeah, but I'd really like to, if you could get any of those guys on the podcast, that'd be wonderful. I'd thoroughly like to hear from them. I think Ben was the actor who played Ben. I can't remember his name, apologies, but he was due to go on the actual Renford Rejects podcast, but unfortunately that never happened, and it's not been rearranged since. So fingers crossed they can get some of the guys on there, or maybe I'd love to hear you interview Holly, or I think Holly Davidson would be great, because I think she completely changed my view of football through the Rejects, and I hope she inspired a lot of young women as well to play. The fact that she was the best out of a lot of them, I think, was arguably the best part of it, because I could see myself in every single person that Rejects, apart from Robin, because she was actually good. I wasn't particularly good player at all, but I had a lot of heart. But yeah, all the others, I was like, I can see me in them. But Robin was far better than the character was far better than I was, and they gave her a proper send off, which I liked, which not many kids shows, especially Nickelodeon shows back in the day, ever did. They just disappear and no one ever mentioned them again. And I thought it was kind of an insult to children and young people that they would just not question that, and that we just accept it and move on. But yeah, at least Rejects give gave Robin a proper send off, which I enjoyed.
Only one series though.
No, I know. We wanted more of Robin. I think Lucy Punch is a great actress, but I wasn't big on Sue because I'm like, she's just not Robin. And as a 12-year-old boy, I was in love with Robin and heartbroken when she left. And it took a while, took a bit because they didn't. Sue was originally a goalkeeper and then came in, but you can't replace Robin. It's very hard to replace Robin.
Yeah, I think so. We'll wind it up in just a moment. Do you have a particular episode of that show that stands out? I realise that's really difficult. I think for me, it changes on a daily basis.
You know what? As a big self-professed Bruno Degrady fan, it was the episode when he's boring Barry Grade. I still say boring Barry Grade all the time. And it was that little girl that, give him that hope to come back as the Italian superstar we know and love. I really enjoyed that episode. I think it was really funny because imagine if you had a child who just started pretending they were Italian with no roots or ancestry, and when it showed his parents who just go along with it. I really enjoyed it, and I think it was a good story about being yourself. Don't care what anyone else says. In the end, be yourself, be happy. I'd probably say that's up there. But there's so many great episodes. The one at QPR with Jason, I thoroughly enjoyed. That was a really clever episode, and I really enjoyed it. I wonder what it was like being a young lad going out in front of all those thousands. Is it with Loftus Road? That must have been crazy, an absolutely amazing experience for the actor involved. Mine.
Definitely. There's some great episodes out there, and you've picked two of the best, I think. They are definitely... I also want to throw the hat in for the much-mentioned episode with Martin Keown and Gianfranco Zola.
Anything with Zola in, everyone loved Zola. That was a good one. I remember that well. And Martin Keown. I think Martin Keown didn't do a bad job as an honorary Razor.
No. I love the whole interplay between him, Terry, and Stoker, and the way that Stoker kind of stares at Martin and goes, "You've gone soft, lad," or what, in the way that he does. And it's so cartoony and sort of panto-y. And yet it's like there's no laugh track. There's no. Like, that's the thing about it. Because it had no laugh track, they could do this cartoony stuff, and it almost came across as almost surreal in a way.
It was a bit of surrealism, and also I found it just childhood imagination, jumpers for goalposts. So that's when you are a kid, you imagine these scenarios, and it added a little bit of that to it. Because when you are a kid, everything's bigger, everything's different. Your imagination, and it captured that childhood imagination perfectly, I thought. But big shout out to Stoker because that actor was brilliant. He overplayed it, but it was brilliant. He was great in that, and probably one of my favourite characters in the show. But the actor was absolutely fantastic. And I remember, I think you were speaking to him. He sounds completely different. He's such a eloquent man, and he came across as this old school PE teacher that you remember from school. And I think he was absolutely brilliant in that. He really was.
Yes, I was surprised when I spoke to him that the voice was different, and then he did it in front of me, and it was like, when you have that moment. I've had it a few times when I've seen an artist, I've interviewed an artist for whatever reason, and it's fine, you think that's that person, but then you see them sing or you see them do the thing that they're known for, and you're like, wait a minute, that's that person. And that's exactly what it feels like when you're talking to Bill Homewood and he launches into the Stoker, and of course he does it on social media as well, in character.
I didn't know he was in social. I'll have to drop him a follow. I absolutely love. I mean, it's so nice after all these years. They obviously loved it so much that they're still involved. They still reminisce. It's great to hear that they had an enjoyable time on it, and still love the show and think very highly of it. There's a lot of love for that show, and I hope they know. Well, I'm sure they do, that they made so many children incredibly happy watching those programs. I loved it. I'd come home from school after a rubbish day at work, and I could watch the rejects, disappear for half an hour and have a laugh, because it was absolutely brilliant. Pure escapism, and as a football fan, what more could you ask for?
Definitely. Come back, Renford Rejects, and come back, Luke, once more to talk to us. We'll talk sensible soccer next time.
Oh, don't get me started on sensible soccer. I could talk your ear off. I love it. So I'd love to talk about it. Anytime you'll have me, I'd love to come on. And thank you for making my very first podcast experience really enjoyable.